Reimagining Success, episode 235. You're listening to the Reimagining Success podcast, where we help you design a business and a life that allows you freedom from the 9 to 5. I'm your host, Anna Lundberg, ex-corporate good girl, now a business mentor and coach, author, mum of 2, and I'm here to help you create more freedom, flexibility, and fulfillment. Now let's get started with redefining success outside of the 9 to 5. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another interview episode on the podcast. I'm here with Sarah Weiler, who I've known for a long time, but we were just discussing how long ago it was we actually saw each other in real life, IRL, as the young kids say. So, Sarah, I'd love to hear from you a little bit briefly. I say often people go off on a tangent for half an hour, but if you could just briefly introduce us, first of all, to who you are, Sure. What you were doing before and what you're doing now, and then we'll dig into all the amazing things that you're working on.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, really lovely to be on here, Anna. And yeah, I feel like it was 2016 maybe, or 2017. It might be. I
feel like, 2016 was when my boyfriend and I started settling back down in London. So I think things began to change for me. So it's very possible. 2016, 2017.
The Canvas Cafe, wasn't it?
Oh yes, the happiness section for happiness. Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah.
So there you go. We got there in the end. So
yeah. So in terms of what I do, I mean, I actually created this kind of concept called Carousel, which is this idea of we have lots of interests and they can kind of come in and out of like focus. So what I always say to people is like, what's at the front of my carousel at the moment? Which is a way of like honoring what's presently happening, but not kind of forgetting that there might be other things that I do as well. But currently at the front of my carousel, there's two main things. One is that I'm coaching teachers. So I'm doing one-to-one coaching in a school with 18 members of staff, one-on-one. So I used to be a teacher and I've been really interested in teacher well-being, how we can kind of shift the culture, like kind of burnout culture in education. So that's like the current thing I've been working on. I'm really enjoying. And I've also started a breakfast radio show with a friend, which is like absolute dream. We did it this morning. And it's a really lovely way of combining like my love of music. We also bring in a bit of coaching. I also do some comedy. So those are some things. And I think probably what I'm realizing everything I do has in common is a way of getting to be lots of versions of me at once, rather than having to keep changing hats. It's like, how can I bring in as many different parts of me in one setting?
Gosh, that's so much to unpick already before we even get into the practicalities of things. But I love that because there's a lot about I talk about portfolio career and multi-passionate, multi-potential, like Renaissance men and women and all these things. But it's so interesting to bring the different characters to the fore at the same time, as you say, because it's otherwise you feel like you're holding being the serious corporate self over here in my consulting. And then, now I get to be an adventure photographer over here, but you're sort of not being wholehearted. So I love that idea. And I love the carousel idea as well, instead of just having to say this is my job title and this is what I do. So I think if people stop listening there, I'm already quite happy with the insight. So there you go. Thank you.
But I think that's the thing with carousel is like, rather, I suppose maybe if your portfolio as well, if you're listening, and I don't know if you'll probably consider yourself portfolio as well, Anna, but like you can have maybe like 20 different things that you might enjoy or do at different times. And that can feel quite overwhelming if you're holding all of them equally. So it's just a way of being like, for example, my ukulele work. So I also run like ukulele workshops in corporates, teaching kind of leadership skills through that. That is something I do, but it's probably not at the front of my carousel right now. So I didn't mention it right now, but it is something I'm getting paid for at the moment and still doing. So, there's also, I guess, there's a practical carousel and there's maybe like an emotional carousel as well. Like, so what am I emotionally excited about right now? But what am I actually practically doing? They might be different things from each other.
And I think it's very pragmatic and flexible because I think we can get so obsessed with nailing that perfect elevator pitch. And this is my exact job. And I've always been, initially I had quite a few different projects. And as you're exploring, experimenting after leaving a very well-defined job role, corporate teaching, whatever it is, you do think, oh my gosh, this is going to be the thing. Oh no, this is going to be the thing. And actually the fact that there can be many things and they kind of fluctuate back and forth, I think that's really beautiful. It allows you to explore and not forget it entirely. But right now that's a little bit in the background while I focus on this new thing. And I think that gives you a lot more possibility, room, opportunity to continue exploring and to be more than one thing without the pressure of doing them all at the same time as well.
Yeah, and also allowing things to maybe have a phase, then you have a break from them, and then you come back to it with fresh eyes. Maybe you pick up a project, maybe you think a project is finished, and there's some, I'm sure you've had this where it's like you're looking at something, you're like, I'm just not feeling connected to it anymore. I put a lot of energy into it. Maybe it's a book, maybe it's a course you're running, and it's like something's not feeling right. So the idea of actually just being like, I'm just going to let that go back around the carousel. And maybe like one day you're chatting to someone and it's like, oh my God, I really want to write that book now. But it needed that break from you to get like, it needed, it's almost like you can overdo something and you can be with it and put too much pressure on it. So actually having that space, allowing the thing itself to have a break from you as well as having a break from it, I think can be really cool.
And maybe getting too wedded to, I've said this, and there's this pressure to be consistent and committed, and you have to be in order to achieve a goal, like to write a book or something. You really have to be quite doggedly working on it and so on. But actually, sometimes you realize that's not anymore a meaningful goal for you right now. So it's quite a powerful thing to be able to pull back from it. I love that you mentioned the ukulele piece, because I remember a post that you wrote some time ago that really resonated with me, where you were talking about that you felt that you'd gone a bit too much. And I apologize, you'll hopefully remember your post better than I will be able to put it into my words. But something like you were trying to make the role of ukulele serve the kind of corporate purpose of being, playing ukulele and playing can actually make you more productive and help you and fit it into kind of the metrics that companies use. And I remember you saying something to the effect of, actually I'm allowing it just to become play again. And that feels so powerful, because I'm always, of course, if you're trying to position something that you're selling to B2B or even for yourself, if you're kind of an overachiever and we want to be busy and we're productive, if I'm playing ukulele, it has to be serving a purpose. And I heard somebody on the radio this morning saying, I'm reading 50 books this year, and I get it, and I've had goals like that in the past, but why can't you just read a book when you feel like reading a book? Does everything have to be, yes, I'm going to be, ticking off this list of books that I'm going to, and then next year I'm going to do this and so on. So apologies if I butchered your insight, but can you share a little bit more about that, how sort of the objective, I guess, of what you were doing shifted with time?
Yeah, no, I remember that was quite recently. So what I was reflecting on, so I was doing some work with one of the big four and on like one of their senior leadership retreats. And I think historically I'd been very much with that client, and also generally when I pitched it, been kind of thinking, how can I help them find value for their company? And I think what I was realizing is, wow, the value right now is that they are sitting together and playing music. That is value. It is about disconnecting from the work. It's about coming back to themselves post-pandemic, even just being in a room with others. Like, I suppose I was seeing the value in just the connection, where maybe before I'd overlook that because it's so obvious. Of course we're connecting, these buzzwords of like connect. It's like, no, but what does that actually mean? That means we're like regulating with other humans, just looking each other in the eye, laughing. There's something beautiful that happens. And I think just having the confidence to be like, yeah, that is the purpose now. That is the purpose. And I think it's partly post-pandemic. It's partly having done it for years and being like, yeah, I'm happy to like see that as I don't need to add an extra layer. In fact, the point is it's not the extra layer. In fact, well, sometimes I think the extra layer also happens. So I think that people do feel more productive after playing music, but I don't want them to do it so that they're more productive.
And sometimes you have to put it in those terms to get your foot in the door with a company that perhaps isn't quite open to something that doesn't have that link. But then actually when you're in that moment, you realize that there's a simpler purpose.
Exactly. And I also think now I will go to companies and say, we need to spend more time together. And this is a beautiful way of doing it. And actually feel confident in that being purpose as well.
I love that. And we talk about purpose. It's quite a big word. I mean, the name of this podcast is Reimagining Success. And I talk a lot about success, which is sort of interlinked with purpose. How has that evolved for you over the time? Did you start as a teacher? How has your view of success evolved the last 10 or even 20 years, I suppose?
Before I answer that, do I need to turn a light on? Is it getting quite dark on the camera?
No, I see you perfectly, yeah.
Okay, let me know if it does.
And your beautiful sunny background,
The sun is setting. I started my career on the Teach First scheme. So I taught for 3 years in an inner city school in London. Well, actually, it was in Zone 6, but it was in London. Really amazing and challenging times. I learned a lot. I became a very good facilitator because it's, it really is. It's like you're drilling facilitation and planning like 5 hours a day and then all of that. I had a feeling around the middle of my third year that it wasn't quite the right use of my energy. Like I had a really strong feeling of that I am drained. I'm drained from this job. There must be a job for me where I don't feel drained. Like that, it can't be how we're built that it's this bad. And I could see teachers as well where it wasn't as draining. So I was like, there's something that's not quite a right fit here. And I went on a really big search, I suppose, to understand what the things were that did give me energy. One of the big influencers were two people, you may know John Williams and Selena Barker, who are two coaches that do a lot around designing a life you love and thinking about getting paid to play, and a lot around, So it was exactly 10 years ago that I did a course with them, and I had a notebook and I had to think about what were the things that I felt in total flow when I was doing. And the idea was to start bringing them into your life more, and then thinking about how you can make money from it. But I'm sharing that because I think that started to become my mark of success, is how much of my day can I spend feeling happy and feeling alive and feeling inspired. And I also appreciate that some of those things won't be paid, but they put me in a state where I'm more likely to then get paid work because of the energy I'll have when I meet people and things like that.
That's interesting. When you said those names, they weren't familiar to me, but I'm just thinking John Williams, that's Screw Work Day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Wait, hang on.
Screw Work, Let's Play.
Let's Play, thank you. Yes, that was one of the big books for me too. I did not know he did courses. I don't know if he did at the time, but certainly if he had, I would have jumped on that too. But that was one of the pivotal ones for me too. And what I find interesting now, and I was just telling you, I quit my job 10 years ago now. So what's very exciting when you're first doing it, at least for me, and I met you in sort of my adventurous phase of paddleboarding and going to random events and so on. And it's easy for things to sort of settle. And then you have a working strategy and you've got your business model and you're doing your things. And I love what I do, but I don't quite ask myself those questions anymore as much as I did before, because it's sort of, it has become settled and anchored. And what's exciting is last year I sort of finished a lot of things. It's all there. I published a book that's been on my sort of waiting list in my head for years. And then I feel like that's almost a chapter and it's even a new decade now. So maybe there's an opportunity to start playing again, because I think that balance of playing and exploring and going with your energy is, but then there's also, I need to bring in money, I need to do what works and so on. I suppose all this to ask, we talk a lot about resilience and my goodness, to launch a breakfast show and to have the confidence to go into companies and say, hey, let me come in and play ukulele. How have you found those ups and downs of working for yourself and the spins of the carousel? How have you been able to build your confidence and have the resilience to deal with some of those harder periods perhaps as well?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't immediate that I was working full time on my business. So when 10 years ago, the start of 2014, I came back to London from traveling and I had 2 part-time jobs and then 1 day a week that I worked on my own stuff. And then gradually over time, reduced the part-time job until I could kind of do my own stuff. So it wasn't immediate. And I guess I think one of the big tips I always give people is don't rely on the thing you're creating for income as you're making it. Obviously that's the intention, but a lot of creativity and inspiration can be killed when you think you need to earn, but the pressure to earn money from it. Absolutely. So I think that really helps, that I'm like, cool, that my income's coming from elsewhere. What do I want to make? What do I want to experiment with? What's flowing? And, I started quite a lot of things and not all of them carried on. But one of the things I did was a comedy night for 7 years. So that was like a regular thing I did. Power of Uke, the ukulele stuff, is probably, financially speaking, the most successful thing I've done, because I have now got to the stage where I'm working with really big clients who pay really well. And that feels amazing. It has been running for about 8 years now. And at the start, I was doing meeting in Brixton and everyone paying a fiver to sit around. And now it's big contracts and stuff. But yeah, that's taken time. And I think maybe the way I suppose I've got a few things, and I can actually put a link to it. I did this thing at the end of 2019, which was a decade in drawings. And I looked at all of the things I've done. And I started with a layer of working for other people. And then I had ideas, side hustles, and then starting to get big money for it. And I just looked over the decade of how they'd all moved up. So I can share that with you, because I think that'd be quite visual to see how things went through. But oh my God, I mean, I think there have been some years where I was it was a really good a really good like flow of different things, and I was earning enough money to feel like I could explore. Other times, like I wasn't earning much or enough, and that really knocked my confidence. And I think the times that have been hardest when I haven't been busy enough. I don't really overwork anymore. Probably a bit burnt out from teaching. I do like probably underwork more than overwork. But I think the times where I do need to be busy, and that's not from a place of toxicity. It's from a place of knowing what energizes me. I like to have lots of things going on. So the times that have been hardest have been times where like the work hasn't come in, or it's felt like a real slog, or I've been pushing something that I kind of need a break from. So there've definitely been periods of time where I felt really lonely as well. I think that's also been hard times where I was working alone a lot, having to generate a lot by myself, not getting much back. So yeah, I guess this is the thing over time, like working out what do I need to energize me? Not necessarily what do I need to bring money in always. It's more like, where's the energy coming from? And I think what I've realized is it's live stuff, like have live contact, whether that's hosting a workshop or running a radio or the comedy night or things like that. That's where I get, it's this point of like aliveness with others.
And the ukulele example is interesting there, because I think so many people would give up along that way. Oh gosh, people are only paying £5. I'm in this little cafe, and how is this ever going to become something? To be able to, obviously, maybe because you have the carousel of different things as well, and because you had the income coming from somewhere else, you can afford, literally and figuratively, to keep experimenting with that. What does your business model, if you can call it that, look like now in terms of, I guess, the different rides on your carousel that make up your business today?
Yeah, so like I say, I've got a few big clients with Power of Uke. So I work with Google and PwC. And so they, like for PwC, for example, that was booked in at the start of the year. So I kind of have all those contracts. Google is more ad hoc, but every few months we have something. So I've got these big bits. And then I do one-to-one coaching. And then obviously the work with teachers in school, which is coaching. So that's kind of bits and bobs. Sometimes do tutoring. But yeah, it's a mixture of coaching and workshops, really, the income. I feel like I've probably forgotten like a massive thing that I do, as often happens. I'm like, oh yeah, I also do that. Obviously also have a quitting podcast, but that's not so much. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing with business model, isn't it? Like some of these things are strategic rather than direct, like you're getting money back from them. So, it's also about profile raising. I have a newsletter, which I write about having a carousel life. It's called Carousel. I have my podcast, the radio show, all of these things are kind of ways of connecting with people. And then like, I do find that the work comes in from quite random places. So I don't know if that answers your question on what my business model is.
Yeah, and I think it's probably more strategic, as you said, than perhaps it sounds, or than you realize sometimes. But it is also quite freeing to open up, because of course my podcast, although it's very much feeding into my business, I do want it to be much broader than just the sort of quit your job and stuff. So I have the platform talking to people about other things and that sort of there. But as you said, you're quitting, which is something I'd like to talk about as well. Your quitting podcast doesn't necessarily then link directly to your Power of Uke workshops, and that doesn't necessarily, and so on. And yet it still builds your personal brand platform. It still boosts your credibility. And as you say, it energizes you and gets you having random conversations, I'm sure, which who knows could lead to something unexpected.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I remember one of my first big clients for Power of Uke was a guy who was a fellow comedian and he performed at my comedy night. And then he messaged me on Facebook and said, in my normal life, I'm a lawyer and we're running a team day. Would you like to come and do Power of Uke? So that was where I thought, yeah, this is interesting, because this is where I'm just in so many different contexts that at some point they all feed off each other. And, the fact that I met that person there is why that, if I have to trace back, okay, so this is another story of like serendipity. I did a hen do in 2016 and a girl was there. And as the hen do, at the hen do, I took Power of Uke because she was a ukulele player, the bride. And the sister was like, could you come and run a workshop? One of the other hens, had been at a festival, like a learning festival. And she said, oh, do you know what? This would be really great there. So I got in touch. I had no idea what this thing was, but it was on Lake Windermere and they did an annual festival for learning and development. And all of the heads from all of the top companies went to it. I didn't know this. I'm just like, oh, cool, I'll come and do this thing that this girl told me about. So I do Power Review, and in there are the decision makers for all the top companies. That is how I know how our connections with Google. That's how I have my connections with PwC and many other people. That's where I work one of my team members who I employ now to do other workshops for me. So, I think that's the thing. It's like that all of these opportunities have come from me doing it at Hendu. That's not strategy. That's being open.
It does make it hard for people then to replicate that strategy.
The strategy is being open.
Yes.
I think the strategy is like, what if I say yes to this?
Yeah.
And what if I'm curious about the people I might meet without pressure to meet people?
And what's important to realize is that everyone is a human being, right? I think sometimes when we talk about even businesses and corporates, you think, oh, that's the corporate, oh my gosh, Google or a consulting company. So, but actually each of them may well have most likely have their own carousel of passions and interests and sports and events they go to and so on, right? So we lose sight of that sometimes, thinking it's this sort of nameless entity that we have to break into. So that's quite reassuring to people, I think.
I loved about LearnFest. Sadly, it doesn't happen anymore. But what I loved about it is they made it like a festival. So you just chat to people over a beer in the evening, and it really did make networking very human.
As I say, I'm sure lots of people listening would be like, "What's that festival again?" Was that because of COVID, do you think, or was it?
I'm not sure, but the whole company, like, big shout out to Impact International, who do still exist. I just think they've reallocated where. I mean, my sense was that it was really great for all the attendees. I don't know how well they did from it. I think we all really loved it because it was amazing. The sensation of networking and stuff. But I think sometimes we can look at, this is what I find interesting, is like people can have an experience and then they'll make a strategy from it and then be like, this is how you do it. And it's like, no, that's how you did it. Yeah. And actually, I think the advice I would say is, like, if you're growing your business, is just keep tuning into like what feels like the logical next step, or not even logical, but what feels like the next step. I really feel it's like follow the joy, follow the, with the ukulele, I was like, I just feel like doing this workshop, and then who do I know? And then I'll try that one. And then, I mean, it's funny. It's nice to reflect, really, because I don't think it felt like I had some big strategy. I just was like, well, what's the next iteration and who can I work with next? And then I guess over time, those clients got bigger.
I think that can be quite scary, because it's obviously easier to, some big coach says, here's the blueprint, follow this and you'll have guaranteed success. And that's something we want to believe in. I think I'm such a fan of strategies and thinking and so on ahead of time, but at the same time, there's only so much you can do from behind a computer. And actually, as you said, as soon as you go out into the real world, actually you need to start talking to people and evolve and adapt. And I love that go where the joy is, go where you're being energized. And you may not realize, actually, this thing that I was planning on building my whole business on is something I don't enjoy doing at all. And that often happens, right? So I think it's being open to those opportunities.
It's so important to realize that as well. And, like I said, I quite experimented with quite a few things. The first business I set up, I stopped after a year. I just wasn't enjoying it. I ran some creative retreats for a few years with a friend, and we also brought that to a close after 4 of them. Learned a lot, enjoyed it, but it kind of came to a natural end. So I think there's also something around, I'm a real experimenter. I really enjoy, like, what could this be? And I just want to get started straight away so I can put oxygen into it. I'm not the kind of person that sits for a year planning. I'm like, I have to force myself to plan for it. I have to force myself to, like, wait a day before I message them.
I think there's the two extremes, isn't it? The people who only plan and don't take action, and people who actually maybe should have done a bit of planning. But I think hopefully there's a nice little mix in the middle. But it sounds like you're doing pretty well there anyway. But you mentioned the quitting podcast, and we've now been talking a little bit about that pulling back. So you talk about things that energize you and the joy, but there are also the things that drain you. Can you tell us more about that? How to sort of be sensitive to when you shouldn't keep going? Because unfortunately, a lot of the time things are really hard, and I have to encourage clients that, you have to kind of lean into that and don't pull away. But sometimes it is right to pull away. So how do we kind of negotiate that delicate balance of knowing when it's time to quit?
Yeah, I think this is such a good question. And a couple of resources as well that could help. One is I designed this thing called the Quitting Quadrant, and there's a Medium post. Maybe you can do a link for it, because it kind of talks you through a process that I created this model when I was trying to decide exactly that question. Like, I wanted to quit something, and I was like, is this because it's just not interesting for me anymore? Or actually, is this a point where I do need to keep pushing? I think the crux of it, I mean, there's so, well, I was going to say the crux of it is, and actually I'm going to change my mind that I think it's complicated. And I think the point of why we don't have an easy answer is that it's messy. It's always, there's so many factors, but I think there's a few things that you can consider. And one is like, do you still care about the wider goal that it was working towards? Like, is that still relevant? Is it still something you want, or did someone else want it? Like, that's the first thing. Like, so say, for example, you're trying to write a book and you're just like not feeling it. How do you know whether it's just not something to write anymore, or that you've reached like an expected dip that you have to go through? So I guess one thing is like, do you actually still want to write a book? Like, did you ever? Was that ever your dream? Is it still your dream? And then I also think there's something about don't make a decision straight away. So give yourself maybe like a month, a week, even a day to not make a decision or decide not to decide. Because there's also like, there's a School of Life video where it says people want to quit their jobs and like get divorced, and actually they need a good night's sleep. Yeah. So there's something quite powerful about like just remembering the basics. Have you had a good meal? Have you had enough water? Have you had a good night's sleep? Because I think when we don't have the basics, we want to get out of situations. It's like it activates our fight or flight. So sometimes we can be like, I need to stop writing this book. I need to move to Spain. I need to do all these things. And you're like, hold on. This isn't a grounded version of me making the decision. So I think that's also another thing. Yeah. See if you want the actual goal anymore. Also see how your state is as you're making this decision. There's often people say like, wait until after your period, like don't make decisions when you're premenstrual. Other people say do make decisions when you're premenstrual, because that's when you're really honest and when you're kind of most clear.
And know yourself, know your moods, know what's going on.
Yeah, and then I think, I really do think that giving it time. And what I always say to people, because I do a lot of quitting coaching now, so people come to me when they're trying to decide whether to quit something. And I say, okay, so this is coming. This is telling you something's not being met. Something's not being met. You wouldn't be deciding to quit it. You wouldn't be thinking about quitting it if everything was fine. There's something's not right. So maybe just sit with that idea that there's something not being met, that you don't need to make any decisions yet. And sometimes, so I'll give an example very recently from me, is that I run a volunteer choir for Sunday Assembly. And it was a lot of work last year. And part of me was like, do I need to leave completely? And I sat with it. I was like, no, something's not right here, but it's not that I want to leave completely. Actually, I think it's just too much work. So what I need to shift is like, how can I take some of the work away? And now I've put it out to the community and said, who wants to like swap shifts with me? So there's a few of us running it. And loads of people came back to me. There's a solution. So that was the right solution. It was, I didn't need to quit, but me thinking I wanted to quit got me even looking at the situation. So that's also what I'd say is usually we don't have to quit, but something needs to change. So what needs to change for it to feel like a right fit?
I think what's powerful there is we tend to think in black and white, and maybe that's the side we just want a quick answer, right? I'm going to quit, I'm going to move, I'm going to split up, whatever it is, boom. Whereas actually the truth is probably somewhere in between. As you say, something's not right, so we can't or shouldn't stay where we are, but we also don't have to quit our jobs, move to Bali and whatever, right? So there's a more complicated, nuanced spectrum of steps that we could take, and it is a bit harder, but it's going to make a meaningful difference without ripping apart your life necessarily. So I think that's where the powerful moves are.
I might just turn the light on now.
You are getting a bit dark now.
We're talking about quitting. Know when to quit, trying to sit in the dark. There we go. But yeah, one of the other things I talk about with quitting is this idea of like us having fight, flight, or freeze. When we all have a kind of default of how we react when something gets hard. So as you can imagine, fight might be, I'm going to make this work. You see it in relationships, right? People are like, something wrong, like not giving up on this. I don't leave. I'm not a quitter. Flight could be like, oh my God, it's too much. I got to go. And freeze could just be paralysis. Like, I don't know. I'm just not going to make a decision. So like we all tend to react in one of those ways when we're stressed. And all of those are useful ways to react when we're not stressed. So sometimes we do need to make a quick decision and get out. Sometimes we do need to push on, like you were saying, like, when is it right to push on? Sometimes we do need to fight, and sometimes we do need to stop and deliberate. So these things of like fight, flight, and freeze are our tools. But when we're stressed, we often do the wrong one. And so it's just interesting. I think a lot of this is around self-awareness. And if you're listening to this being like, I've got something right now that I'm thinking I want to quit, just give yourself some space even to just sit with that idea. Because often we're so scared to even look at quitting that we just don't even see what it is. It's like, what is this? What is this that is being asked of me here?
And you mentioned before that your tendency is more to underworking, which I love. And I think I probably am in that camp too. I've got the 3 days a week with the kids in nursery and that's all I can do. And I'm too tired in the evenings. We still have difficult nights, etc. So I'm sort of, and I'm at a place in my business where I kind of can do that and say no to things, which is amazing. But it sounds like you have a lot going on. So with that kind of carousel model, with all these different things, first of all, what does your week or month or year look like? That's the first question, I think. And then we can see the second part to that.
Yeah. And just to comment on the underworking, like, I think I am doing a lot of things. But then, maybe at the moment it feels like nice amount of busy. But I think often people look at my life and go, wow, you're doing so many things. And for me, it feels quite empty. Not empty, that sounds, but like there's a lot of space. I also think that's just because I like a lot of stuff.
I was going to say, when you like what you're doing and you feel energized by it, it doesn't feel like it's draining you, right? It doesn't feel like, oh, I've got to do this one more thing, one more workshop. Because if you're present there and you're enjoying it, then it's a thing that brings something to your life rather than takes it away. But, do you have a typical week? Is it totally random? You just, depending on when Google calls you up, you pop over there, or, what does it look like?
Honestly, I don't have a routine really. And that's got its pros and cons. I mean, I have like regular clients, but they're not always on the same day. The radio show is once a week, but not always on the same day. It depends on when my friend are free. What I realized, I was actually talking to a friend last night and I was saying, I have a lot of things that are regular in my life, but not necessarily structured always. And like, as in I have things that I do regularly. I swim quite a lot. I have the radio show. I have the coaching in the school. Like there's things I do like a monthly day of musical joy at my house. Got the Sunday assembly volunteering. Like these are all things that show up regularly in my life, but they're not exactly the same model every week. And I think what I need, because I am someone that like needs variety and I actually like uncertainty. I realized recently is like I need a little bit of if I know what I'm doing for the rest of the year, I would feel quite bored at that idea. I need some things to be unknown and leaving space for serendipity.
There's a bit of sort of flexibility in the schedule again, right? Because I found, at least in my initial experience, when those days suddenly stretch out in front of you, I've dreamed of not having an alarm clock and just going where my energy is. But when you can do anything, you often end up doing nothing. So I think having that rhythm of knowing, well, these are the kinds of things I want to be doing this week and this month, then that at least gives you, you don't have to every day wake up, oh my goodness, what am I doing today? Which can be quite
I think that's what my darkest moments, it seems strange, but I think my lowest moments have been when I wasn't sure what I was doing. And I had too much flexibility. So it's like having the right, you need to have these building blocks or these things that are certain for then this creative space to be around. But when it's all creative space, that's too much void. You need these bits of structure, but not too much structure because then there's no space to live. I think when it feels right, it's when there's like, and that's how I feel it has been recently, is like enough stuff in the diary that I'm like, I've got something to bounce off. I've also got days when I could be in my flat making music or getting a podcast sorted, or do you know what I mean? Dreaming a bit.
But does that just happen? Because for me, I had to keep, for example, Thursdays, the kids are away, but I kept them free of calls generally so that I could write my book, create my course and so on. I find that if you just have white space, then that space easily fills. Are you able to hold that space without actually blocking the space, if that makes sense?
I have to be really boundaried about it, actually.
I was going to ask.
And I noticed that. Like, so on my calendar, I try and have one day a week where there's nothing. But it's interesting that, because I think, you can be like, oh, well, I'll just do one call. And then, I'll just pop to the doctor's. And then before you know it, it's like the whole day's gone. So yeah, I think it's protecting the creative time and seeing it as a commitment as well is also really important. But yeah, I don't think I'm that good at that yet. I'd say that like there's often days where I'm like, I have just a couple of things here and there, and it would be better for there to be nothing and then for everything to be on one day.
But I think it's good to have that intention, but also know, again, pragmatically, that look, if there is sort of a call that needs to happen then, or you need to get whatever, then you can do that. It's just making sure you don't make too many exceptions, because then you no longer have it there, right? Then suddenly, before you know it, it's gone completely. And I love the creativity is something I'm really reflecting on now too, in terms, it's one of those things. Yeah, I think for a whole other podcast episode, but it prompted me to reflect on that. So that's something coming up, I think, for me as well, in terms of what that means and how to make space for it. I'm sure you're familiar with Eve Rodsky's Find Your Unicorn Space. Have you heard of her?
No, I don't.
Or maybe not. As a parent, she's written a book called Fair Play, which I haven't read still, but I recommend to everybody, which is all about dividing chores in the house fairly among the couple. And her latest book is Find Your Unicorn Space. And this the unicorn space is this magical place, which it sounds like you're in, where, it's really expressing those different facets of yourself. And it is something, whether it's dance or whatever it is. And it's not something you do like going to gym to keep fit. It's something you do because it brings you that energy and so on. And she argues that, it's actually the thing that we usually put last, especially, I think, maybe women, mothers, to do some stereotypes and so on, but actually it's one of the things that should come first. And it's what, as you said, actually, even from a business strategy, energizes you, which then has repercussions and brings joy to others and opens up business connections and so on. But Unicorn Space, I think it would be something that would be worth exploring for you.
Yeah, and the fact that a lot of people put that last is really interesting, because I think I put it first. I think
it definitely sounds it, yeah.
And I think sometimes I feel like I'm noticing as I'm talking to you, I'm always a bit like, oh God, is Anna going to think I don't work much because I'm going to? Do you know what I mean? But because that's the stereotype, right? Isn't it? Like this is the thing we should put last. And I've somehow created a life where I put it first. And I noticed some discomfort around saying that to you. It's really interesting.
It is interesting to notice, and I can very clearly say that doesn't come across. And if anything, because I'm in the place where I am, I suppose, of maybe putting those things last, I aspire to this. And I recall where I was a few years ago, of really just looking and going where I felt like it physically, emotionally, and so on. So that is a little foreign. Having said that, and I have the same, now exercise has been a really important thing for me. That's not creativity, but it's something where, I'm out in nature by myself running and so on. And sometimes I do feel a bit, hang on a second, I'm like, before I've even started the day, I'm always doing exercise, and I've done this. By the time I sit down, half the day maybe has gone, and I even sometimes play the ukulele, very rarely, but it's there. Because that, harks back to being in Hawaii, where I learned to play, that was sort of me, Anna, as an individual, and creativity and so on. So, I don't know, unfortunately, our culture still does kind of have a stigma that we're supposed to say, oh, I'm so busy and I'm so important, and I've got so many emails and I'm so stressed, I'm not sleeping, and somehow that's a badge of honor.
It's bad. And a lot of my coaching clients actually are people who want to bring more creativity and joy to their lives, and are like, and feel resistance to it or feel discomfort about it. And a lot of people, it's like, how do I even start that? Like, it's so, like you said, it's so foreign.
And what's interesting, actually, bringing all this together with the quitting, as you said, and my realization, maybe naively, very late in the day, has been that most people are never going to quit their jobs. Even though that's kind of, my message is not quit your job, but it is, people come because they kind of are fed up with their job and they want to have more freedom, flexibility, and so on. Many people won't ever do that, but they want to find better work-life integration in the day-to-day. They want to have more time for their family. They want to have more creativity. I had a client who went through my whole business incubator program, only to decide he didn't want to start a business, and he ended up writing 2 novels. And it's that kind of thing, which, because actually, as you said, you come, and I'm sure the coaching clients come to you too, thinking like, oh, I need to, and actually there's something missing, and there's this space outside of the drudgery of that kind of 9 to 5, as I call it. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to quit your job and work for yourself. That's one option, which I think is a great option. But I think it's exciting that there are so many things within the parameters of your business, of your job, where you can find that joy again.
Absolutely. And what I also notice is that the people end up replicating the very things they wanted to lead in by running a business. So they'll like have crazy hours. And, you know, I mean, I used to run an accelerator for entrepreneurs, for like female founders. And this girl came in every day and she was like, just so tired. I'm like, I have to be in at 9. I'm like, why? And she's like, I was like, what time do you want to go? And she's like, no, like 9:30. I was like, it's your business. Like, and she's like, oh my God, I could start half an hour later. And she was like, never even considered, like blew her mind that she could choose the parameters of her working day.
It's so programmed. And I wrote a blog post on that, when it's not the job that's the problem, it's you actually, because so many with these so hardwired into us that we have to, and it's so culturally acceptable and the norm. Even now with hybrid working and 4-day work weeks and so on, we've still got these generally older white men who are kind of protesting against it. And so I think it's a bit of an uphill struggle. But I think that's unfortunately, that's all we know. And so even if you do want to quit, I think start reimagining those things within your life, right? Because if you can start making new habits and change your mindset and so on within that job, then if and when you do decide to go off on your own, then you already have those habits and different ways of looking at it.
Absolutely. Because I think it's too shocking otherwise. When you leave teaching, you are like timetable to the minute. It was so shocking when I left teaching. I was like, I don't know what to do with myself. Like, I have never had this much autonomy, and it's too much sometimes. It's almost like a shock to your system, like a literal shock to your system. So I think that's such a good point of like gradually bringing in some of those habits. And the other thing is, when you start to bring in some of the joy and unicorn time, as you call it, you might not need to quit your job.
Exactly that. Yeah.
It's like when I do the quitting project with people, I'm like, if you're in resentment, which a lot of people are, I'm like, you need to bring in more flow and joy. So you kind of see the opposite. If you look at it on the Medium post, you can see what's needed. So, and I'm like, and that doesn't have to come from your job. And you can add stuff on when you're overwhelmed that actually might rebalance. So it's not always about taking things off. And sometimes people clear everything and then there's too much space and they're miserable even more. Whereas if you're, you know, you can be overwhelmed in your job and be like, but I'm going to start dancing. And suddenly something shifts and this doesn't feel so stressful anymore. But when everything is your job, of course it's going to feel overwhelming. Too much time on one part of your life.
And that's quite a counterintuitive, tough concept to understand. Add something and you'll actually feel less overwhelmed. But that's the really important insight, I think, to close on, because that's it. You think that, oh my gosh, I've got to work less. And of course you can't work less because your to-do list is getting longer and longer. And then you've got to add exercise and creativity. Oh no, now I have to add this stupid unicorn space on. But actually that's the thing that, you know, energizes you and creates more space. That's the sort of, in a way, really obvious truth, but very hard to kind of get your head around.
Yeah. So it's kind of adding to rebalance rather than adding to overwhelm.
Yes, not because that's the thing with all these things, yoga, mindfulness. Oh gosh, now I have to also do yoga, and then it becomes like a stressful to do, rather than the whole point of it to begin with was to de-stress you, and it just becomes one more thing that you have to tick off on your list. So Sarah, sort of a double question now, because usually I'd wrap up to ask where can we find you, and that just brings me back to sort of the concept of personal branding and so on. With all these different projects, how do you handle? Do you have one website that has like 10 different tabs? How does it work?
So I've got a sarahweiler.com website, which took me quite a while to get.
Personal brand, Sarah, this is me.
Because I was like, I want one place, but like, how do I talk about myself? So, and I've actually got on, it's quite cool, the women who designed it created a carousel. So it's like, this is my carousel. So I have on that like a bit about me. I have a page for working with me on one-on-one, a page for working with me through businesses, and then a body of work page, which is where like all of my stuff lives, and you can browse all of the stuff I've done. So it's kind of a holding page. I think it's probably the best version I can come up with at the moment of like how to display portfolio careers. But I think we're going to need more and more of this type of website as people are starting to be many things and enjoy their like Renaissance lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then I also do have a Power of You website and then a Quitting Quadrant website as well. It's more like a landing page from MailChimp. But those are kind of, I have made those separately because actually I made them before, so I've kept them. But yeah, the sarahweiler.com is like, you can browse that. And I've had really nice emails from people in the past going, I'm so pleased to find this because it's like an example of how you can express all the things you do. And in a way that has now become my brand. That's the things. So that's an interesting one, isn't it? When rather than fighting it, you're like, that is the thing. The thing is that I don't have a thing. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Yes. Okay. The thing is that you don't have a thing, but you definitely do have a thing. That's the thing. So, but I love that. And the Sarah Weiler is so important because, of course, the power of you might, you might quit that one day, and yet Sarah lives on, and that's still part of your body of work. Maybe that workshop isn't available anymore, right? So it is important to build that presence of you for yourself as well, because I think when sometimes we have that, I'm one person on LinkedIn, as we said at the beginning, and one person on Instagram, that suddenly you're like all compartmentalizing yourself, and you're being torn into. That's when your calendar gets overworked. Whereas if you're finding a way to flow between them and you can be your whole self all the time, I think that's a beautiful
trying to get there. That's the aim. And I think if you're going back to your original question of like, what is success? I think it is where I feel integrated, where all parts of me are like, I don't have to like ignore that bit here. I can bring it all, and that's welcome. Which I'm finding with the coaching in schools. Actually, I'm really bringing everything, and it's really lovely. But yeah, in terms of finding me at Sarah Weiler Sarah on Instagram. I'm not really on Twitter. I have a Twitter account, but I don't really use it, so I wouldn't try and find me there. And then my Carousel newsletter, which I put out once a week. That's where I talk about living a carousel life and kind of musings about all of the stuff we've been talking about, creativity, how to manage your time, how to say no, where to say yes. Like I write every week about what I've learned that week about living a kind of portfolio life. So if that seems interesting, like you can sign up for that through my website, or it's tinyletter.com/carousel.
Perfect. You've got a new subscriber in me, so I'll get that right after the session. Thank you very much. Oh my goodness, I'm so glad it took some time getting there, Sarah, but as expected, an amazing episode. So thank you so much for your insights. Congratulations on building this beautiful carousel. And it's rare that sort of sounds a bit arrogant. It's rare that there are new concepts to me, given I've spent the last 10 years looking at these things, but there are definitely some really thought-provoking things in there for me too. So thank you so much.
Good. Thank you so much, Anna. What's like, I always ask people this, like, what's one thing you want to remember about this conversation? Like, it'd be nice for us both to share.
Oh, it's a great question. And you're putting me on the spot because now there are so many, but I think this idea of it's hard not to pick up on the carousel, because I think I gave myself more freedom to have all these different strings to my bow before. And now I've consolidated the business, and it's this, and this is the strategy. And I've become quite serious, and that's kind of the model, and I'm sticking with it. And I think a little sort of chink in the armor of a bit of sunlight coming through. So hang on, how can I introduce a bit more play, a bit more, as we said, creativity, and some of those things that maybe have been at the back of the playground, the theme park, whatever you want to call it, might come to the fore again. So that's left me some food for thought, which is great for this new year and new decade as we record this. So yeah. Good
stuff. And I will remember this unicorn space. I love that idea. A really nice way of talking about the things that I was doing, but it's great to, and just to remember that for a lot of people, that is the thing that is hardest.
And again, because you find it easy in a way, that's what makes you such a great person. That's why it's so useful to have those conversations with people, because we need you in this world where it's such a low priority. So thank you so much, Sarah.
Oh, thanks, Anna. It's so nice to chat to you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
The Outside of Business Academy is a self-paced course for you to work through in your own time to learn and implement the foundations of building a profitable business that lets you escape the 9-to-5. So if you're full of great ideas but lack the knowledge and experience to turn them into a viable business that will actually support your desired lifestyle, or you feel like you're doing all the right things and yet you're just not getting the traction and results that you're after, you have come to the right place. I'm here to help you design a profitable and enjoyable business that gives you freedom from the 9-to-5. Register for the Academy and get started learning today at onestepoutside.com/course. That's onestepoutside.com/course.